The scent of garlic bread and terror filled the air. Three suited predators cornered a lone woman, expecting a victim. In 15 seconds, they met a warrior and learned the true meaning of a fatal miscalculation. The Seattle drizzle, a signature of its autumn nights, fell in a fine, persistent mist, coating the cobblestones of Pioneer Square with a slick, reflective sheen. Antique gas lamps, steadfast against the encroaching modernity, cast hazy halos of amber light that blurred at the edges, painting the historic district in strokes of watercolor nostalgia. Through this damp, atmospheric quiet, a figure moved with a purpose that seemed at odds with the city's languid pace. Seraphina Washington, 35 years old, walked with her hands tucked into the pockets of her charcoal, gray cashmere sweater. The fabric was a soft armor against the chill, a stark contrast to the rigid, life-saving plates she had worn for the better part of the last 2 years. Beneath the sweater, a silk camisole rested against her skin, a whisper of civilian comfort she was still reacquainting herself with. Her dark denim jeans were tailored, practical, and her low-heeled leather boots made almost no sound on the wet stones, a habit of silent movement ingrained so deeply it was now second nature. For 18 months, her world had been the ochre dust of Kandahar, the oppressive humidity of a jungle whose name was classified, the bone-deep cold of a mountain hideout. Life had been a series of high-stakes calculations, where the margin of error was measured in lives. Now, back on home soil for less than a week, she was navigating a different kind of terrain, one filled with the mundane and the beautiful, the cacophony of normalcy. It was a world she had fought to protect, yet one she no longer felt entirely a part of. Her gaze, sharp and constantly scanning, took in everything. The couple huddled under a single umbrella, their laughter a small, bright sound in the gloom. The distant wail of a ferry horn across Elliott Bay. The way the light from a gallery window illuminated the falling raindrops, turning them into a cascade of tiny, fleeting diamonds. These were the details her training had taught her to catalog as environmental baselines, but her soul was trying to relearn how to simply see them as beautiful. She turned a corner, drawn by a familiar, comforting aroma. Trattoria del Sogno. The Dream Restaurant, a small, unassuming establishment nestled between a rare bookstore and a modern art gallery. The name struck her with a poignant irony. Before every deployment, this was her ritual, her last taste of a world she was about to leave behind. The sign, hand-carved wood, was beaded with moisture, and the windows were fogged from the warmth within. The scent of roasting garlic, simmering tomatoes, and fresh basil wafted out. A siren's call to a soldier, starved for peace. Pushing open the heavy oak door, she was enveloped by a wave of warmth and sound. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of dozens of conversations, the cheerful strains of an old Dean Martin song playing softly from hidden speakers. The scene was a tableau of ordinary life. Families sharing pizzas, couples leaning in close over glasses of red wine, a group of friends celebrating a birthday with boisterous laughter. It was chaotic, vibrant, and so profoundly safe it made her ache. A young host greeted her with a smile. "Table for one?" Sarah nodded, her own smile feeling slightly rusty. "Yes, please. Somewhere quiet, if possible." He led her toward the back, to a small table tucked into an alcove. It was perfect, back to the wall, a clear and unobstructed view of the entire dining room, including the entrance and the kitchen doors. Anyone else would see it as a cozy, private spot. Sarah saw it as a position of tactical advantage. She couldn't shut it off. Her mind automatically mapped the exits, identified potential hardcover like the solid marble top bar, and noted objects that could be improvised as weapons. A heavy wine bottle, a steak knife, a sturdy chair. She slid into the booth, the worn leather cool against her skin. On her wrist, a simple, worn silver bracelet caught the candlelight. It was unadorned, its surface scratched from years of wear, a memento from a fallen teammate. She ran her thumb over it, a silent communion with a ghost who understood the chasm between that world and this one. She was trying, truly trying, to just be Sarah tonight. Not Operator Washington. Not the point man on a dozen high-risk entries. Just a woman enjoying a plate of pasta. But as she watched the steam rise from the candle flame, she knew the warrior was never truly off duty. It was always there, watching from the shadows of her mind. Sarah ordered the fettuccine alfredo, a creamy, decadent dish that was the antithesis of the nutrient-dense, vacuum-sealed rations that had been her sustenance. While she waited, she sipped her water, consciously forcing her shoulders to relax, her hands to rest open on the table. She tried to focus on the music, to pick out the individual conversations, to immerse herself in the ambient peace. But a discordant note had already begun to play, a low, grating hum that threatened the restaurant's harmony. It came from a bar. 3 men, sharply dressed and radiating an aura of aggressive self-importance, were holding court. It looked like they had just stepped out of a boardroom meeting that had run late and devolved into a liquid dinner. Their suits were expensive, their haircuts precise, their laughter loud and performative. The one who appeared to be the leader was tall and broad-shouldered, with a mane of perfectly coiffed dark hair. He wore a heavy, ostentatious Panerai watch that he seemed to consult every few minutes, as if his time were infinitely more valuable than anyone else's. His name, as she would later learn from his booming introductions to the bartender, was Julian Croft. His eyes, a cold, assessing blue, swept the room not with appreciation, but with a sense of ownership, as if everything and everyone were there for his personal evaluation and amusement. Flanking him was a thinner man, Leo Vance, whose suit was a shade too shiny, his movements jerky and bird-like. He was the hype man, the court jester, laughing the loudest at Julian's pronouncements, his shrill cackle cutting through the general din. He was the kind of man who thrived on reflected power, an amplifier for the alpha's arrogance. The third was a bull of a man, Marcus Markthorne, his muscular frame strained against the seams of his tailored jacket. He was quieter than the other two. His presence communicated through sheer physical intimidation. He stood slightly behind Julian, a loyal enforcer, his gaze flat and menacing as he scanned the other patrons. Their corner of the bar was a vortex of obnoxious energy. Empty beer bottles and half-empty whiskey glasses cluttered the polished wood in front of them. Their conversation, laced with profanity and industry jargon, was punctuated by loud, braying laughs that made nearby diners flinch. "Can you believe what Henderson pitched?" Julian boomed, slamming his glass down for emphasis. "The guy's a dinosaur. We're talking disruptive innovation, and he's bringing a fossil to a gunfight." Leo shrieked with laughter. "A fossil? That's classic, Jules. Absolutely classic." Sarah watched them, her professional assessment kicking in. Alpha, Beta, Enforcer. A classic power trio. Their body language was expansive, territorial. They leaned back, legs splayed, taking up far more space than necessary. It was a primal display of dominance, wholly out of place in the civilized, cozy environment of the Trattoria. A young waitress approached them, her smile strained. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" Julian's eyes roamed over her, a slow, insolent appraisal that made her visibly uncomfortable. "Another round of the Macallan for me and Mark. And for you, sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. "How about you bring us that smile without the side of anxiety? It's a Friday night. Live a little." The waitress's face flushed. She mumbled, "Right away, sir," and retreated, her shoulders tensed. Sarah's jaw tightened. She had seen this behavior countless times in foreign countries, from men who believed their power, their money, or their uniform gave them license to treat others as objects. To see it here, in the heart of her own city, felt like a personal affront. The trio's attention soon drifted from the staff to the other patrons. They began a running commentary, loud enough for several tables to overhear. They mocked a man's tie, critiqued a woman's laugh, and openly speculated about the cost of another couple's dinner. It was a campaign of casual cruelty designed to elevate themselves by diminishing everyone around them. Sarah saw the ripples of their behavior spreading through the room. A family with young children asked to be moved to a different section. An elderly couple who had been holding hands across their table, now sat in stiff silence, their evening soured. The manager, a harried-looking man in his 50s, hovered near the kitchen, casting anxious glances toward the bar, but doing nothing. He was intimidated. The suits, the watch, the sheer volume of their arrogance. It was a combination designed to quell any challenge from a man earning an hourly wage. Sarah took a slow, deliberate breath. The scent of garlic and basil now mingled with the acrid smell of impending trouble. Her fettuccine arrived, a beautiful swirl of pasta in a cloud of steam. She picked up her fork, determined to ignore the growing storm. This was her night off, her moment of peace. But the instincts of a protector are not a switch to be flipped. The noise from the bar was no longer just background chatter. It was a threat signature, and it was escalating. The trio's roving gaze of contempt finally settled on a target. At a small table adjacent to the bar sat a young couple, looking like they had been pulled directly from a college campus brochure. The young man, Liam, had thoughtful eyes behind black-rimmed glasses and the lean, slightly awkward build of a scholar. The young woman, Chloe, was an art student, her vibrant scarf a splash of color against her simple dress. She had a sketchbook open on the table beside her, and they were sharing a tiramisu, their heads bent close together in the intimate bubble of young love. They were the perfect victims, unassuming, physically unintimidating, and clearly too engrossed in each other to pose a threat. To Julian and his cronies, their quiet happiness was an invitation for disruption. It started with Leo. Leaning over the bar, he stage whispered to Julian, his voice carrying easily. "Check it out, Jules. Romeo and Juliet over there. Betty's reading her poetry about the existential angst of a limp-wrist artist." Julian chuckled, a low, predatory sound. He raised his voice, pitching it to carry directly to their table. "Hey, Picasso," he called out, making Liam look up, startled. "Nice work, but you look like you can barely afford her appetizer. A masterpiece like that deserves a better gallery." Chloe's face turned a deep shade of crimson. She immediately looked down at her plate, her fork frozen over the dessert. Liam, flustered and embarrassed, tried to ignore them. He put a protective arm around Chloe's shoulder and whispered something to her, attempting to pull her back into their private world. But the bubble had been burst. The direct assault on his masculinity was a calculated move. Julian wasn't just being a drunk. He was systematically dismantling the young man's confidence in front of his partner. It was a power play, as ancient as it was ugly. Sarah watched this unfold, her fork hovering over her pasta. Every instinct screamed at her. This was the point of intervention. In a tactical scenario, this was the moment to de-escalate before the situation turned kinetic. But this wasn't a tactical scenario. This was a restaurant. She was a civilian. She repeated the mantra in her head, "Not your mission, not your fight." She forced herself to take a bite of the fettuccine. The sauce was rich, creamy, perfect, but the taste was muted, overridden by the surge of adrenaline in her system. Her senses were heightened. She could hear the nervous tremor in Chloe's breathing, see the way Liam's hand, resting on the table, was clenched into a white-knuckled fist. The three men at the bar, emboldened by the lack of resistance, escalated their campaign. "Seriously, sweetheart," Julian continued, now addressing Chloe directly. "Don't you want to know what it's like to be with a man who can actually order the whole wine list, not just the house red?" Mark, the silent enforcer, let out a short, sharp laugh, like a dog's bark. It was his first vocal contribution. It was more menacing than anything the other two had said. The entire section of the restaurant had fallen into a tense, uncomfortable silence. The diners closest to the couple were now pointedly avoiding eye contact, their focus intense on their own plates. They were witnesses, but they were choosing not to be participants. Fear was a powerful paralytic. Sarah's internal struggle was a raging battle. One half of her, the soldier, was already planning 3 steps ahead. She noted the distance to their table, 12 feet. She calculated the trajectory to intercept. She identified the primary threat, Julian, and the secondary, Mark. The other half, the woman desperately tried to reclaim a normal life, was pleading with her to stay put. "Let the manager handle it. Let someone else be the hero. You've done your part." You've earned your peace." But then she looked at Chloe's face. The young woman's eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and humiliation. She wasn't just being harassed. She was being stripped of her agency, turned into a prize in a sick, one-sided contest. And in that moment, Sarah saw the faces of other women she had encountered in her career. Women in war-torn villages, women who had been victims of men who believed power was their birthright. The line had been crossed. Not a physical line, not yet, but a moral one. The peace she sought couldn't be bought at the price of someone else's dignity. Liam finally found his voice. It was quiet but firm. "We'd appreciate it if you'd leave us alone." Julian threw his head back and laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "You'd appreciate it?" he mocked. "That's adorable." He set his whiskey glass down with a decisive thud, a look of finality in his eyes. He was done with the verbal sparring. He was ready to claim his prize. He pushed himself off his bar stool and started walking toward their table. The air in the restaurant crackled, thick with the certainty that something terrible was about to happen. Sarah's hand, resting on the table, slowly curled into a fist. The battle within was over. The warrior had won. Julian moved with the unhurried swagger of a man who had never been told no, and meant it. Each step he took toward the young couple's table seemed to suck the air out of the room. Leo and Mark remained at the bar, watching like vultures anticipating a kill, their smirks widening with each footfall. He stopped directly beside Chloe, looming over her. The scent of expensive cologne and aged whiskey was overpowering. "I was talking to you," he said, his voice a low growl, ignoring Liam completely. "When a man like me talks to you, you answer." Chloe shrank back in her chair, pressing herself against Liam. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" Julian's laugh was a short, sharp bark. "Sweetheart, this isn't trouble. This is an opportunity." And then his hand shot out. He didn't grab her arm gently. He seized it, his thick fingers wrapping around her delicate wrist with bruising force. He yanked her forward, pulling her out of her chair with such violence that it tipped backward and crashed to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent restaurant. A collective gasp went through the room. Chloe cried out, a sharp yelp of pain and shock. As she was pulled from her seat, the delicate silver chain of her necklace caught on the edge of the table and snapped. A string of tiny seed pearls scattered across the floor, skittering into the shadows like frightened insects. The sight of those small, innocent pearls rolling away into the darkness was a visceral symbol of the moment, a quiet, beautiful evening shattered by brute force. "Hey!" Liam scrambled to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the tiles. He tried to grab Julian's arm, to pull him away from Chloe. "Get your hands off her!" It was a brave but futile gesture. Mark, the enforcer, had already moved from the bar. With an almost casual shove, he sent Liam stumbling backward. Liam lost his footing and collided with the corner of their own table, the sharp edge digging into his ribs. He grunted in pain and crumpled slightly, clutching his side. He was out of the fight before it had even begun. Chloe was now standing, trapped in Julian's iron grip, her eyes wide with terror. She looked around the room, her gaze a desperate, silent plea for help. She saw faces frozen in shock, in fear, in indecision. She saw the manager fumbling with his phone behind the bar. She saw a sea of people who were watching, but doing nothing. And then her terrified, tear-filled eyes locked with Seraphina's. Across the room, Sarah was no longer watching. She was observing. The crash of the chair, the snap of the necklace, the shove that neutralized Liam. It had all happened in under 3 seconds. In her mind, the situation had shifted from verbal harassment to physical assault and unlawful restraint. The threat level was now critical. The time for hesitation was over. She didn't stand up abruptly. Her movements were fluid, deliberate, and imbued with a chilling calm. First, she placed her napkin neatly beside her plate. Then, she picked up her fork and knife, which she had been holding, and laid them down parallel to each other. They made a soft, distinct click on the ceramic plate. In the dead silence of the restaurant, the sound was as loud and clear as a judge's gavel. That simple, precise action drew every eye in the room that wasn't already on the central drama. It was a signal, a declaration. Something was changing. The balance of power was about to shift. She rose from her seat, not with anger, but with the focused intensity of a surgeon approaching the operating table. Her chair slid back without a sound. She took a single step forward, out of the alcove and into the main dining area. She didn't shout. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke with a calm, resonant authority that cut through the fear-choked atmosphere. Let her go. The words were simple, direct, and utterly uncompromising. It wasn't a request. It was a command. And it was aimed directly at Julian Croft, a man who clearly wasn't used to being given orders by anyone, let alone a lone black woman in a cashmere sweater. He turned his head slowly, his grip on Chloe not loosening in the slightest, a look of incredulous annoyance dawning on his face. The final, fatal confrontation had been set in motion. Julian's head swiveled toward the source of the command. His eyes, clouded with alcohol and arrogance, narrowed as they took in Sarah. He saw a woman of average height, with a slender but athletic build. He saw her dark skin, her intelligent eyes, and her calm, almost unnervingly still posture. What he did not see, what his entire life experience had rendered him incapable of seeing, was the danger. He saw a nuisance, not a threat. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice dripping with condescending sarcasm. "Did you say something?" He gave Chloe's arm a slight shake, eliciting a small whimper. "We're a little busy here." Leo, from his perch at the bar, let out a high-pitched cackle. "Whoa, Jules, look out. It's the social justice police. You're in big trouble now." Sarah ignored him. Her focus was locked entirely on Julian, her gaze as steady and penetrating as a laser sight. "I said," she repeated, her voice even, each word carefully enunciated, "let her go." She took another slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them to about 8 feet. She kept her hands open and visible, a classic de-escalation posture that also kept them ready for immediate action. Julian's smirk tightened. The woman wasn't backing down. She was challenging his authority in front of an audience. This was no longer just about harassing the girl. It was about crushing this unexpected defiance. "Listen, sweetheart," he sneered, his tone turning ugly. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private conversation. Why don't you go back to your table and finish your salad before you get involved in something that's way above your pay grade?" "This stopped being a private conversation when you put your hands on her," Sarah replied, her voice remaining level, betraying no hint of emotion. This infuriated Julian more than any shouting could have. Her calm was a mirror, reflecting his own brutishness back at him. He decided to try a different tactic, intimidation through status. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he blustered, puffing out his chest. "I'm Julian Croft. I could buy this entire restaurant and fire everyone in it just for the inconvenience of this conversation. One phone call from me could make your life very, very difficult in this city." Sarah's expression didn't change. Not a flicker of fear, not a hint of intimidation. "I don't care who you are," she said, her voice dropping slightly, gaining an edge of cold steel. "I care what you're doing, and you will stop. Now." The direct, unequivocal nature of her command was a slap in the face. It bypassed all his posturing and struck at the core of his actions. The room was holding its collective breath. The diners were no longer just witnesses. They were a captive audience to a battle of wills that was rapidly approaching its breaking point. The manager was now visibly on the phone behind the bar, his hand trembling as he spoke to a 911 dispatcher. Leo Vance, seeing his leader momentarily flustered, decided to intervene. He slid off his bar stool and swaggered towards Sarah, a foul grin on his face. "Hey, maybe she's just lonely, Jules. Is that it, honey? You want some attention too? We've got plenty to go around. You just had to ask." He made a lewd gesture, and his proximity brought the reek of stale alcohol and cheap bravado with him. Sarah didn't even grant him a glance. Her eyes remained fixed on Julian. This was a critical principle of engagement. Always focus on the primary threat. Leo was a distraction, a gnat. Julian held the hostage. "This is your final warning," Sarah said, her voice now barely above a whisper, yet it carried across the silent room with terrifying clarity. "Release the girl and walk away. All three of you." The sheer audacity of it. This lone woman giving orders to three men, one of whom was built like a refrigerator, was staggering. Julian's face contorted in a mask of pure rage. The last vestiges of his control crumbled. "You're done," he spat, his voice hoarse with fury. He finally let go of Chloe, but only to shove her roughly toward Liam, who stumbled to catch her. His attention was now fully on Sarah. "You wanted to be a hero? Fine." He turned to his cronies. "Mark, Leo, it seems this lady needs to be taught a lesson in respect." Mark cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing ominously. Leo rubbed his hands together with glee. The verbal confrontation was over. They were crossing the Rubicon. Leo, being the closest and most impulsive, decided to strike the first blow. "I'll handle this little bitch," he snarled, and lunged forward, his hand reaching out to shove Sarah, to put her in her place, to physically assert the dominance they had failed to establish with words. He had no idea he wasn't just shoving a woman. He was tripping the wire on a finely tuned instrument of war. The instant Leo's hand made contact with her shoulder, the world seemed to shift into a different frame rate for Sarah. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the distant clatter from the kitchen, the soft music, the panicked whispers, all faded into a dull, distant roar. Her training took over, a symphony of conditioned reflexes and muscle memory, honed over thousands of hours in kill-or-be-killed simulations. Leo's shove was clumsy, fueled by ego rather than technique. He expected her to stumble back, to be intimidated. Instead, Sarah moved with him, absorbing the kinetic energy of his push. In one fluid motion, she pivoted on the ball of her left foot. Her right hand shot up, not to block, but to seize his advancing wrist. Her left hand simultaneously clamped down on his elbow. Before Leo could even register that his push had failed, Sarah executed a textbook wristlock. She twisted his arm in a way nature had never intended, using his own forward momentum against him. A sickening pop echoed in the immediate vicinity as his shoulder joint was hyperextended. A strangled gasp escaped his lips, his face contorting in a mask of shock and agony. But she didn't stop there. As he was bent forward, off balance, and helpless, her right knee came up in a hard, precise strike to his solar plexus. The air exploded from his lungs in a desperate whoosh. His eyes rolled back in their sockets, and he collapsed to the floor like a marionette whose strings had been cut, gasping and writhing, completely incapacitated. Julian watched his friend go down with a look of stunned disbelief. That disbelief quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. Roaring like a wounded animal, he charged, swinging a wild, telegraphed right hook aimed at Sarah's head. To a trained fighter, the punch was an eternity in the making. Sarah didn't retreat. She flowed. She ducked under the arc of his arm, the wind from his fist rustling her hair. As she came up on his inside, she was in the perfect position. Her left palm struck upward, not with a flat slap, but with the hardened heel of her hand, connecting precisely with the point of his chin. It was a classic knockout blow, designed to rattle the brain inside the skull and disrupt the central nervous system. Julian's head snapped back, his eyes glazing over instantly. Simultaneously, her right foot swept out, hooking behind his ankle. A simple but brutally effective leg sweep. His brain was no longer giving his legs commands, and with his balance point destroyed, his large frame crashed backward. He fell like a felled oak tree, landing with a thunderous boom that shook the floorboards. He hit a table on his way down, sending plates, glasses, and a half-eaten lasagna cascading to the floor in a cacophony of shattering porcelain and splattering sauce. He landed amidst the wreckage, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Mark Thorne, the enforcer, the muscle, froze for a critical second. His brain, which operated on a much more primal level, processed the scene before him. Leo was a gasping heap on the floor, and Julian, his alpha, was out cold. His fight-or-flight instinct screamed one word: flight. He spun around, intending to bolt for the door. He was big, but fear made him fast. He took 2 powerful strides. He might have made it, but Sarah was already moving. As Mark turned, she scooped something from the table Julian had just destroyed. It was a cloth napkin, stained with tomato sauce. With a flick of her wrist, she threw it. The napkin, weighted by the sauce, flew through the air like a small, red projectile and slapped squarely across Mark's face, momentarily blinding him. It was all the time she needed. She closed the distance in 3 silent, explosive steps. She didn't attack him from behind. She came alongside him, her body low. She drove her shoulder hard into the back of his knee, buckling his leg. As he stumbled forward, she wrapped her arm around his neck from the side, sinking in a non-lethal but inescapable carotid restraint. A blood choke. Mark struggled for a moment, his large hands clawing uselessly at her arm. But he was off balance, disoriented, and fighting against a technique perfected to end resistance quickly. Within 4 seconds, the flow of blood to his brain was cut off. His body went limp, and Sarah gently lowered his unconscious form to the floor, preventing his head from smacking against the hard tile. It was over. The clock on the wall read 9:22 p.m. The entire kinetic sequence, from Leo's touch to Mark's collapse, had taken no more than 15 seconds. Sarah stood in the center of the carnage she had wrought. Leo was moaning, clutching his shoulder. Julian was out cold amidst a sea of pasta and broken glass. Mark was slumped peacefully by the entrance. The restaurant was utterly, profoundly silent. Every diner, every staff member was frozen, their faces a mixture of terror, shock, and dawning, incredulous awe. Sarah took a single, slow breath, her heart rate already returning to normal. She straightened her cashmere sweater, which had barely been disturbed. Then she turned her calm, dark eyes to the young couple, who were huddled together, staring at her as if she had just descended from another planet. The war was over. The fallout was about to begin. The silence that followed the 15-second storm was a vacuum, heavy and absolute. It was broken by a low, pathetic groan from the floor. Leo Vance, the instigator, was slowly pushing himself up, his face pale and slick with sweat, his arm cradled uselessly against his chest. His eyes, wide with pain and disbelief, fixed on Sarah. The spell was broken. The restaurant erupted into a cacophony of panicked noises. A woman sobbed. A man swore under his breath. Chairs scraped as people scrambled to put more distance between themselves and the scene. It was Mark who recovered consciousness first, his training as a bouncer giving him a resilience the others lacked. He sat up, shaking his head to clear the fog, his hand going to his neck. When he saw Julian still unconscious and Leo whimpering, his survival instinct kicked in, and it took the form of a classic aggressor's defense. Flip the narrative. "She's crazy," he yelled, his voice rough and panicked. He scrambled to his feet, pointing a trembling finger at Sarah. "She just attacked us. For no reason. We were just talking, and she went absolutely insane." Leo, seeing his cue, immediately joined the chorus. "He's right," he wailed, his voice cracking with pain. "She's a maniac. She came out of nowhere. She broke my arm. Somebody call the cops. This woman is dangerous." The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. They were attempting to repaint a clear-cut case of self-defense into an unprovoked assault, casting themselves as the victims. It was a desperate, cynical ploy, but in a world of confusion and fear, it was just plausible enough to plant a seed of doubt. The restaurant manager, a man named Mr. Rossi, finally emerged from behind the bar, his face the color of ash. He held his phone like a shield. "The police are on their way," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously between the fallen men and the calm woman who had felled them. "Please, everyone, just stay calm. No more trouble." Sarah remained perfectly still. She didn't argue, she didn't shout, she didn't offer a single word in her own defense. She simply stood there, her posture relaxed but alert, her gaze sweeping over the 3 men. Her silence was her testimony. It was the profound, unshakable calm of someone who knows the truth is on their side and has the patience to wait for it to be revealed. To some in the room, her silence might have looked like guilt. To others, it looked like something far more formidable: absolute control. Julian began to stir amidst the debris. He sat up slowly, a large, red welt already forming on his chin. He looked at his fallen comrades, at the shattered plates, at the sea of shocked faces staring at him. The humiliation washed over him, quickly followed by a surge of vindictive fury. "She assaulted us!" he roared, finding his voice. He struggled to his feet, weaving slightly. "We were welcoming her to join our conversation, and she snapped. She's some kind of trained fighter. It was a setup. She wanted to rob us." The accusation of robbery was a bridge too far. A ripple of disbelief went through the crowd. They had all seen her simple, elegant attire, her quiet demeanor. She looked as much like a mugger as he looked like a victim. But the men were committed to their fiction. They began to embellish it, adding details, their voices rising in a crescendo of feigned outrage. "I saw it," Leo cried. "She was watching us all night, waiting for a chance. We were just being friendly." Mark insisted. "This is what happens when you try to be a nice guy in this city." Their performance was aimed not just at the other diners, but at the future arrival of the police. They were trying to establish a narrative to muddy the waters so completely that the truth would be drowned. They were counting on the fact that in a he said, she said situation, 3 well-dressed, presumably affluent men would be believed over a lone black woman. It was a gamble based on a lifetime of societal privilege. Sarah let them talk. She let them weave their web of lies. She watched as they gestured wildly, their faces masks of performative victimhood. She knew that every word they spoke was a shovel, digging their own hole deeper. The physical confrontation had ended in 15 seconds. The battle for the truth was just beginning, and she was content to let her opponents exhaust themselves before she made her first move. Her battlefield had changed from the physical to the psychological, and here, too, she was an expert. Just as the trio's fabricated narrative began to solidify in the chaotic air, a new voice cut through the noise. It was not loud, but it carried the unmistakable weight of intellectual authority and moral conviction. That is an absolute and contemptible falsehood. All eyes turned toward a corner table, where an elderly gentleman was slowly getting to his feet, using a handsome, silver-topped cane for support. He was Dr. Alastair Finch, a retired history professor from the University of Washington, a man who had spent 50 years teaching his students the importance of primary sources and objective truth. He fixed his piercing blue eyes on the 3 men. "I have been sitting here for the past hour," he declared, his voice as crisp and clear as a page of fine parchment. "I saw and heard everything. You 3 gentlemen were intoxicated, belligerent, and systematically harassing the staff and patrons. You then targeted that young woman." He gestured with his cane toward Chloe, and when her companion asked you to desist, you physically assaulted them both, dragging the young lady from her chair. He took a slow step forward, his gaze unwavering. "This woman," he nodded respectfully toward Sarah, "intervened only after you refused multiple verbal requests to stop. She acted not as an aggressor, but as a protector. History has a word for men who prey on the vulnerable and then cry victim when they are met with resistance. It is not a flattering one." The professor's eloquent, damning testimony was like a boulder dropped into a stagnant pond. The ripples spread instantly. A middle-aged woman, sitting with her family near the door, stood up, her face flushed with anger. "He's right. I saw it all. You 3 were disgusting. My daughter was so frightened by your language, she was afraid to even walk past your table to go to the restroom. That woman is a hero." Suddenly, the dam of fear and silence that had held the other diners in check broke. A chorus of voices rose up, corroborating the professor's account. They were completely out of control. "I saw him grab her. He tore her necklace. She told him to stop 3 times. We all heard her." The young couple, Liam and Chloe, who had been huddled together in shock, now found their courage. Liam, though still pale and clutching his bruised ribs, stepped forward. "She saved us," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "If it wasn't for her, I don't know what would have happened. We begged them to stop, but they wouldn't listen. She was defending us." Chloe, tears streaming down her face, held up her wrist, where angry red marks were already beginning to form a dark bruise. "This is the proof," she cried, her voice ringing with indignation. "This is what he did to me, and you have a nerve to say you were just talking." The tide had turned decisively and irreversibly. The three men were now surrounded by a jury of their peers, and the verdict was unanimous. Their faces went from feigned outrage to genuine panic. The final nail in the coffin of their lie came from the ubiquitous technology of the modern age. "Don't worry," a young man at a nearby table called out, holding up his smartphone. "I got the whole thing on video." From a moment, he grabbed her. "Me too," another voice chimed in. Suddenly, it seemed like half the people in the restaurant were holding up phones, their screens glowing like digital torches of truth. Mr. Rossi, the manager, now emboldened by the support of his customers, stepped forward. "And our security system recorded everything," he announced, pointing to a small, discreet dome camera on the ceiling. "High-definition video and audio. The police can have the entire raw file." The three men looked at each other, their faces ashen. Their web of lies had been utterly, comprehensively shredded. There were no more arguments to be made, no more narratives to spin. They were trapped by a chorus of truth, backed by a mountain of digital evidence. They had gambled on the silence of bystanders, and they had lost spectacularly. The only sound now was the approaching wail of sirens, growing closer and closer, a mournful symphony signaling the end of their night of arrogant impunity. The front door of Trattoria del Sogno swung open with authority, and two uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence immediately commanding the chaotic room. Leading them was Sergeant Eva Rostova, a woman whose sharp, intelligent eyes and no-nonsense demeanor suggested she had seen the worst of the city and was rarely surprised. Her gaze swept the scene with practiced efficiency, taking in the tableau of chaos in a single, comprehensive glance. The overturned table, the shattered glass, the three disheveled and guilty-looking men, the crowd of agitated onlookers, and the unnaturally calm black woman standing at the center of it all. "What's going on here?" Rostova's voice was calm, but carried an edge that demanded a straight answer. Before anyone else could speak, Julian Croft lunged forward, his performance of victimhood reignited by the sight of a badge. "Thank God you're here, officer," he exclaimed, pointing dramatically at Sarah. "This woman attacked us. We were minding our own business, and she just went berserk." Leo and Mark quickly echoed his claims, a desperate, overlapping clamor of assault, and she's crazy. Sergeant Rostova held up a hand, silencing them with a single gesture. She didn't even look at them. Her experienced eyes were fixed on Sarah. She had been a cop for 15 years, and she knew the difference between the frantic, self-serving noise of the guilty and the quiet confidence of the innocent. She saw no fear in Sarah's eyes, no agitation, only a steady, waiting calm. "Ma'am," Rostova said, addressing Sarah directly and respectfully, "can you tell me your side of the story?" Sarah gave a slight nod. Her account was as precise and economical as her movements had been. These three men were intoxicated and were verbally harassing multiple patrons. They then physically assaulted that young woman. She gestured to Chloe. When they refused to release her, I intervened. One of them, she indicated Leo, then initiated physical contact with me. I responded with the necessary and proportionate force required to neutralize the threat to myself and the other civilians in this room. Her language was formal, almost like an official report. The phrases proportionate force and neutralize the threat hung in the air, words not typically used by civilians. Rostova's eyebrow arched slightly. This was getting interesting. "That's a lot," Julian shouted. Rostova finally turned her gaze on him, and it was as cold as the Seattle rain outside. "I will get to you," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She then turned to the rest of the room. Did anyone else see what happened? It was as if a floodgate had opened. Dr. Finch stepped forward to give his eloquent account. The mother with the frightened daughter shared her story. Liam and Chloe tearfully explained their ordeal. One by one, a dozen people offered to give statements, all of them painting the exact same picture. "And we have video," the young man with a smartphone said, stepping forward. Rostova's partner began taking statements and collecting the digital evidence. Rostova herself walked over to Mr. Rossi, who eagerly handed over the DVR from his security system. As her partner began reviewing the first of the cell phone videos on his tablet, Rostova walked back over to Sarah. She noticed for the first time a small, almost invisible scrape on Sarah's knuckles, likely from her strike to Julian's chin. "You're very composed for someone who is just in a 3-on-1 fight," Rostova observed, her voice softer now, a note of professional curiosity in it. "Your response was remarkably efficient. Have you had some kind of formal training?" Sarah met her gaze. "I've had some training," she replied, the simple, understated words carrying a world of meaning that Rostova could only guess at. At that moment, Rostova's partner looked up from his tablet, his eyes wide. "Sarge, you need to see this." Rostova walked over and watched the footage. She saw the whole ugly affair unfold in crystal clear detail. The harassment, Julian grabbing Chloe, the necklace breaking, and then the takedown. She watched Sarah move with a speed and precision that was breathtaking. The wrist lock, the knockout, the chokehold. It wasn't a brawl. It was a clinical, flawless execution of advanced close-quarters combat techniques. She looked from a video back to the calm woman standing before her. Some training, she thought to herself with a wry internal smile. That's the understatement of the year. She walked back to the three men, her face now a mask of cold, official fury. "Julian Croft, Leo Vance, Marcus Thorne," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "You are all under arrest for assault, public intoxication, and disturbing the peace. Turn around and put your hands behind your backs." "What?" Julian sputtered. "You're arresting us?" "She's the one who should be arrested." Sergeant Rostova leaned in close, her voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper. "I have you on video assaulting a woman, and I have a dozen witnesses who will testify to it. The only thing this other lady is guilty of is saving me and my partner a lot of paperwork. Now, turn around, or I will add resisting arrest to the charges." The clinking sound of handcuffs being ratcheted shut was the final, satisfying punctuation to the night's events. As the three disgraced men were led out of the restaurant in shame, a spontaneous round of applause broke out among the remaining diners. Justice, swift and unequivocal, had been served. The story of the fight at Trattoria del Sogno did not end when the police car door slammed shut. In the digital age, it was only the beginning. Before the last of the broken glass had even been swept up, the videos from that night were already beginning their inexorable spread across the internet. It started on local Seattle social media feeds, posted with breathless captions like, "You won't believe what just happened at this restaurant in Pioneer Square," and "Woman takes on 3 jerks and wins." The footage was electrifying. The raw, shaky cam quality only added to its authenticity. Viewers saw the arrogant entitlement of the three men, the genuine fear of the young couple, and then the explosive, controlled violence of the lone woman who stepped in. By morning, the story had been picked up by local news blogs. By noon, it was the lead story on the websites for every major Seattle television station. The clips went from thousands of views to hundreds of thousands, then millions. The story had gone viral. National news outlets and content aggregators quickly latched on. The narrative was irresistible, a real-life David and Goliath story, a tale of righteous justice delivered with cinematic flair. The mysterious, unnamed heroine was dubbed the Angel of Alfredo and the Seattle Savior. The footage was analyzed and dissected by a legion of online experts. Martial arts forums lit up with debates. "That's not Krav Maga," one user wrote. "The economy of motion, the focus on joint manipulation and nerve strikes, that's pure military-grade CQC, close-quarters combat." A former Marine posted a frame-by-frame breakdown on YouTube. "Look at her stance," he explained, circling Sarah's feet with a digital marker. "Perfectly balanced. Look at the way she keeps her head on a swivel even after the threats are down. She's scanning for other hostiles. This isn't a civilian who took a few self-defense classes. This is a professional operator. I'd bet my pension on it. The speculation about her identity became a national obsession. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Meanwhile, in her small, quiet apartment overlooking Puget Sound, Sarah watched the storm she had created with a growing sense of dread. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly with texts and calls from friends and former teammates. "Sarah, was that you in that video? Dude, your takedown of that last guy is going to be taught at Quantico. Drinks on me." She had wanted a quiet return to civilian life. Instead, she had become the most famous woman in America. The news reached her command chain with lightning speed. She received a terse, formal summons to report to her superior officer, Commander Hayes, a man whose stern demeanor was legendary within naval special warfare. She sat in his office, the picture of military composure, as he stared at her from across his immaculate desk. He slid a tablet toward her. On the screen was a news article with the headline, "Who is the mystery warrior woman? The hunt for the Seattle hero." "The principle of the quiet professional is the bedrock of this community, Washington," Hayes said, his voice a low rumble. "We operate in the shadows. We do not seek the spotlight. You appear to have missed that memo." "Sir," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I was off duty. A violent crime was being committed against civilians. I acted to protect them." "Your actions were, by all accounts, exemplary," Hayes conceded, a flicker of something that might have been pride in his eyes. "Your technique was flawless. Your restraint was commendable. However, the consequences have been loud." He gestured to the tablet. "The entire country is now trying to figure out which branch of the Special Operations community you belong to. The Pentagon's Public Affairs Office is having a collective meltdown." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "The genie is out of the bottle, Sarah. We can't put it back in. The question now is how we manage it." As they spoke, the internet's hive mind was already closing in. Amateur sleuths on Reddit and other forums were piecing together clues. Someone who had been in the restaurant remembered her first name. Another used facial recognition software to cross-reference her image with public records. By the end of the week, the secret was out. A military news outlet, citing anonymous sources within the Department of Defense, broke the story. The Seattle savior was Seraphina Washington, an active-duty, highly decorated U.S. Navy SEAL. The revelation turned the viral storm into a Category 5 hurricane. A woman, a black woman, was a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite and notoriously secretive brotherhoods in the world. The story was no longer just about a bar fight. It was about shattering stereotypes, breaking barriers, and the hidden face of the modern American warrior. Sarah Washington had wanted peace and quiet. Instead, she had become a symbol. For Julian Croft, Leo Vance, and Marcus Thorne, the viral storm was not a matter of intrigue and inspiration, but a deluge of public shame and catastrophic consequences. The digital footprint of their arrogance was now permanent, and the fallout was swift and brutal. Julian Croft, the charismatic tech executive, was the first to fall. The board of his publicly traded company, already dealing with a negative press, convened an emergency meeting. The video of their senior vice president assaulting a woman and then being knocked unconscious in a pile of pasta was not conducive to shareholder confidence. The company's stock took a noticeable dip. Their carefully crafted image of being a progressive, inclusive workplace was in tatters. Julian was fired via a terse, public statement that cited a violation of the company's code of conduct and a commitment to zero tolerance for harassment and violence. His golden parachute was revoked. He went from a corner office to a pariah overnight, his name synonymous with entitled thuggery. Leo Vance, the smarmy financial analyst, found his career evaporating just as quickly. The prestigious firm where he worked prided itself on integrity and trust. A video of one of their analysts engaging in a drunken brawl and then lying to the police was an unforgivable breach. He was terminated, and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, launched an investigation that resulted in the suspension of his license. The shame was compounded when his fiancée, a woman from a prominent Seattle family, saw the video. The wedding was called off. The ring returned via courier. In the space of a week, he lost his job, his reputation, and his future. Marcus Thorne's downfall was less corporate, but just as complete. The high-end fitness club where he worked as a personal trainer was inundated with calls from angry members, mostly women, who said they would never feel safe with him in the gym. He was fired. Worse for him, a background check conducted by the prosecutor's office revealed a prior conviction for assault, a fact he had hidden from his employer. This elevated his current charges from a misdemeanor to a felony. The court case was a formality. Faced with incontrovertible video evidence and a parade of credible witnesses, their high-priced lawyers advised them to plead guilty to lesser charges to avoid a trial that would only prolong their public humiliation. They were sentenced to probation, mandatory anger management counseling, substantial fines, and 200 hours of community service. The judge, a stern woman who looked at them with undisguised contempt, made a point of reading her sentencing statement to a packed courtroom. You three operated under the assumption that your wealth and gender afforded you a different set of rules, she stated, her voice echoing in the silent room. You believed you could intimidate, harass, and assault with impunity. You learned last Friday, and you are learning again today, that you were catastrophically wrong. Your greatest punishment will not be the one I hand down, but the one you have earned for yourselves, the permanent, public record of your cowardice. Their humiliation was a stark contrast to the unexpected boom experienced by Trattoria del Sogno. The restaurant became a local landmark, a tourist attraction. People flocked there, hoping to sit at the Sera table, or just to soak in the atmosphere of the place where justice was served alongside the lasagna. Mr. Rossi, overwhelmed by the positive attention, framed a high-quality still from the security footage, a shot of Sarah standing calm amidst the chaos, and hung it on the wall with a small brass plaque that read, "The Night of the Quiet Professional. Courage is always on the menu." The consequences for the three men were a powerful, public lesson in accountability. They had started their evening believing they were untouchable, the kings of their small, self-important world. They ended it as a national punchline, a cautionary tale about what happens when arrogance writes a check that a Navy SEAL is there to cash. In the months that followed, the story of Seraphina Washington evolved from a viral news item into a piece of modern folklore. She was no longer just a soldier. She had become a cultural touchstone. The Navy, after some initial consternation, astutely recognized the unprecedented positive publicity. They didn't send her on a talk show circuit, which would have been contrary to the ethos of the SEAL teams, but they did approve her participation in a few carefully selected events. She agreed to speak at a national conference for a nonprofit dedicated to empowering young women. Standing on a stage in front of thousands of bright, eager faces, she was a picture of quiet strength. She didn't talk about combat or violence. She talked about choice. Every day, we are all faced with choices, she said, her voice calm and steady, filling the auditorium. We can choose to look away when we see an injustice, or we can choose to look it right in the eye. We can choose to be silent, or we can choose to speak up, even if our voice shakes. You don't have to be a soldier to be a warrior. A warrior is simply someone who chooses to stand between a threat and those who cannot defend themselves. True strength isn't about how much harm you can inflict. It's about how much good you can protect. Her words resonated deeply. The hashtag #VLikeSarah hashtag began trending again, this time associated not with the fight, but with small, everyday acts of courage. Standing up to a bully, calling out a sexist joke, helping a stranger in need. Self-defense and martial arts schools across the country reported a massive surge in female enrollment, with instructors citing the Sarah effect. The young couple, Liam and Chloe, became advocates in their own right. They started a campus organization to promote bystander intervention training, sharing their story to teach others how to safely de-escalate situations of public harassment. We were frozen, Liam would say at their meetings. But one person's courage can be contagious. It can remind you how to find your own. The legacy of that night was a complex tapestry. For three men, it was a permanent stain of disgrace. For a small Italian restaurant, it was a new chapter of unexpected fame. But for the wider culture, it was a powerful and necessary reminder. It was a reminder that heroes are not always who we expect them to be. They could be quiet women in cashmere sweaters. It was a reminder that the most formidable stereotypes are often the most fragile. And it was a reminder that sometimes, in the face of ugly arrogance, the most eloquent and effective response is 15 seconds of decisive, unapologetic, and righteous action. On a rare sunny afternoon, Sarah found herself back at the Seattle waterfront, looking out at the calm, gray-blue waters of Puget Sound. The wind was crisp, the air clean. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of peace. Her life had not gone according to her quiet plan, but perhaps it had followed a more important one. She was still a quiet professional, but her actions had spoken with a volume that had echoed across the nation, leaving a legacy of strength and inspiration in its wake. The story of Seraphina Washington has come to a close, but the echo of her courage is just beginning. Justice and strength reside in the heart of everyone who dares to stand up. Have you ever witnessed a moment like this? Share your story in the comments, but please comment respectfully, as everyone's experience deserves to be heard. If you believe one person's choice can change the world, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you in the next story.